Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey there, you lovely radical. Jump on board for the 11th episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast. I kind of still can't believe that this podcast actually exists. I mean, I remember at the start of this year, 2016, when I just came out of the major back surgery that I had, this whole thing was really only a dream. And I had about as much knowledge about how to set up a podcast as I had about rocket science. And now, here we are on this messy journey to leave diet culture behind and work towards a life with much more fun and less restrictions. And we're on this journey together. I love that. I can say that I'm proud of what I did here, and I want to tell you why. Because first of all, I'm super insecure. I still am, and I probably will always be. And my gremlin still goes, "Who do you think you are?" So it's a real step for me every time that I do such things. And second of all, because I created this thing all by myself from scratch. No help, no support, nothing. And yet, here it is. And I'm not telling you this because my ego is on steroids or anything, but because I really want to say, whatever it is you're dreaming of, go for it. And I don't mean put yourself under pressure, think of the end goal and white knuckle it. Not at all. Because if you think about how perfect something has to be and how you have to figure it all out, then it can get too much and you'll probably just be paralyzed and not do anything, just like I did forever, kind of waiting for the perfect circumstances that, funny enough, never came. So whatever it is, just take a first step. For me, that meant starting to watch somewhat boring tutorials on YouTube and to read tech blogs, to just, read about tips for podcasting, to listen to other podcasts about podcasting. And for a few months, all I did was learn new stuff that I had zero clue about before. And that was not the interesting part, but it was necessary. And I just took all the time I wanted because I thought I'm probably not going to do it anyway, but I want to know how this works. So I really put zero pressure on myself. And only then could I take the next small step, say, I don't know, come up with an idea for a name for the show or the structure. And I never had the end form in my head because I really didn't believe in myself enough. And it probably would have paralyzed me, as I said, sort of like standing in front of the Himalaya with hush puppies on my feet. Like, no, I'm never going to make it up there. So this is ridiculous. Why even start? So if you recognize this and you relate to that, I tell you, take one step, even if it's just a tiny step, and just, gathering some information about what you want to do. Just take that step. And whenever it goes too fast or you get dizzy, take a break. Just do what feels good and take your time. There's no one out there judging you. All I'm saying is, do come out. Use your voice, whatever it is. You are as much a badass as the woman I have on my show today. And she certainly wasn't as confident as she now looks like. I really think it's a journey for all of us, That's why we're doing this together. It's always good to have someone having your back and encouraging you and reminding you of the fact that you are a badass and that you're just growing into learning it. I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but as I'm recording this intro, it's Sunday, September 4th, which means yours truly is now 43 years old. And instead of getting a birthday present, this year, I decided to just give you a birthday present because it's my birthday and it's a present. Why not? Just turn it all around. You know, looking back, I had so many amazing birthday parties in my life. And this is one of the very few I've had that I'm basically almost alone. I will see someone later on, but basically I'm alone. And this is a bit weird because I was used to having so many people around me and parties. And I want to say that over the course of the development of my eating disorder and exercise addiction, those parties became less fun for me. I don't know if you can relate, but I didn't let on anything, of course. I tried not to let anyone know that I was suffering. But really, I don't remember when there last was cake allowed for me on a birthday or fancy dinners. Simply because my disorder told me that I had to restrict all that because I don't have any control over those gourmet pleasures. So I even denied myself cake or chocolate or, I don't know, fucking French fries on my birthdays. And I even made myself exercise on my birthdays. Instead of, say, going out for brunch with my friends, or having breakfast in bed with a boyfriend that I of course didn't have because I was busy being fit and watching my food intake. And I'm only now learning to unlearn what has become such a deeply ingrained belief that I have to change my body or do something to maintain the weight and that I'll only be accepted at a certain weight. Such old habits, and it hurts to see how much my rigidity has cost me. I'm talking health, friends, relationships, carelessness, joy, rest, fun, and how ridiculously hard it is to re-allow all that into my life. Because there's so much anxiety building up now that I'm re-allowing all these things. So if you can and still have a choice, just don't go down that rabbit hole. It's really, really not worth it. And just try and learn to accept your magnificent self just as you are right now. You're not going to succeed at this overnight. But again, that's why we're in this together and why we have each other's backs. Because I tell you, reverse engineering is fucking hard, pardon my French. And I wish I had learned all that I do learn now earlier on in my life, because then I would have spared myself all these years in misery, really. And to give you and myself a nice little boost, here's my birthday gift to you. It's my wonderful interview with the incredible Virgie Tovar from San Francisco. I could just say she's a woman I adore and highly respect, but just for the sake of it, I'm going to read you some of her credentials that make me look like a newborn, basically. So, Virgie Tovar, she's an author, activist, and one of America's leading experts and lecturers on fat discrimination and body image. She's the editor of Hot and Heavy, Fierce Fat Girls on Life, Love, and Fashion, and she's the mastermind behind hashtag lose hate not weight. She holds a master's degree in human sexuality with a focus on the intersections of body size, race, and gender. After teaching female sexuality at the University of California at Berkeley, where she completed a bachelor's degree in political science in 2005, she went on to host The Virgie Show on CBS Radio in San Francisco. And she is certified as a sex educator, and she was voted Best Sex Writer by the Bay Area Guardian in 2008 for her first book. Virgie has been featured by the New York Times, MTV, Al Jazeera, the San Francisco Chronicle, NPR, Huffington Post, Bust Magazine, Jezebel, SF Weekly, and many others. Her most recent speaking engagements have included University of Washington, Earlham College, Hollins University, University of California at Berkeley, University of California at Davis, California College of the Arts, Sonoma State University, and Humboldt State University. Wow. She offers workshops and lectures all over America, and when I called her, it was almost dinner time for me, meaning it was pretty early for her. And I love it. I can say I basically took Virgie out of bed.
Yeah, I just got up. It's like 8 a.m. here. And yeah, I got up early and went and got coffee, and that took a while. Yes.
So you're clearly a morning person? Not.
Yeah.
I'm really happy you came on the show. This is such an honor for me.
Good, good. I'm glad to be here.
So, to start off, I would like you to introduce yourself and your life. And for that, I have a great quote by yourself. You wrote, "I had a fantastic body image until I was in kindergarten." So please, Virgie, take us back there and tell us your story.
Yeah, so I was born into a fat family. I was a fat baby. I was a fat child. Um, and I knew that I was bigger than other children, but I didn't have any feelings of shame around it. In fact, my body inspired a lot of delight and curiosity. I thought my body was really cool and interesting. I remember I love telling this story. I used to come home from preschool, at age 4, and I would take off all my clothes in the bathroom, and there was this hallway, and I would run down the hallway naked, and then I would stop at the end of the hall, and I would spread out my arms and legs, and I would jiggle as hard as I could. Yeah, and I would shake my arms and shake my legs, and I loved, the sensation for me of pleasure is so ingrained in my memory. It was so clear that I loved the way it felt to move like that. And so I think that, when we live in, I live in a culture, the US, and I think most of us live in cultures where people are taught that fat is a bad thing and a shameful thing and an unattractive thing. We believe that we have always held that belief, but the truth is we had to learn that. That's something that, children don't come into this world with shame or hatred. I really think that we teach children how to do that sort of thing. And so, when I came into kindergarten at age 5, that was my introduction to being taught that I was fat and that fat was bad and that I should try to change my body by any means necessary. And so in a lot of ways, that was the beginning of my education in what it means to be a fat woman in the United States. Mm-hmm. And also it was my introduction to diet culture. And at school, we call it bullying or we call it teasing. And I think that I don't like those words because I think that the behavior that they did had extremely powerful long-term effects on my life.
It's traumatizing.
I think, literally not feeling safe at school when you're a child, you spend 7 or 8 hours a day at school. And for me, it was relentless. It never stopped. It was every single day. And it was very systematic. It sort of felt like their intent was to make me feel worthless, And in a lot of ways, it's interesting. Now I realize in retrospect, one of the reasons that sexism and misogyny are so powerful is because for girls, we grow up being tortured by boys. Not always, but a lot of times, there's a very gendered way in which boys take on most of the body policing as we grow up. It was so rare that I would have a day where I wasn't teased for being fat, that whenever it happened, I would go back after the day was over and I would go back and try and retrace my steps and try to repeat the day exactly the next day just so that I could see if I could, have another day free of being made fun of. That was how rare the days were. And so growing up, this had a few effects for me. I didn't feel attractive. In a lot of ways, I didn't even feel like a girl, because I think what ends up happening when you're a bigger girl is that boys sort of treat you really poorly. They refuse to sort of engage with you as a girl. And then your friends, when I was growing up, my friends, we would often, play house and things like that. And I always played the husband. I always played the boy. And so I was really confused about my gender. I didn't understand how I didn't think I was a boy, but I didn't really think I was a girl either. So that was one of the sort of long-term effects. Another long-term effect, interestingly, and this is statistically proven, when I did start having sex, I did not feel confident to advocate for myself. So like I didn't feel confident demanding, my own pleasure. I didn't feel confident demanding condoms. And they've shown that like women who experience fat shaming feel less comfortable asking for what they want. And this is like a greater concern, right? This is a greater concern for like the spreading of illness and whatnot. And so anyway, like that was one of the long-term effects. And I think for me, just like I feel like fat shaming and dieting took over my life, like took over every single day of my life for years and years and years and years. And I got obsessed with exercise. I became obsessed with calorie counting.
When did you start that?
I started my own starvation diet for the first time when I was 11. And I only ate toast and lettuce for an entire summer, and then I would exercise. And so I lost weight. I mean, not a ton of weight. Like my body is naturally fat. So, my body doesn't like to lose weight. It just like, it just doesn't. So, anyway, I lost some weight, but not enough, quote unquote, in the eyes of my peers. And so the teasing didn't really end, so it's like after 11, I tried starvation again when I was 18 years old and got pretty sick. I gave myself like it's called scurvy, which I don't know.
The lack of vitamin C, right?
Yeah, the lack of vitamin C, which is what pirates used to get. Yeah. And
is that when you were in Italy?
Yeah, I was in Italy and I was refusing to eat in Italy, which is like crazy. But this is how sad my body image was, that I was like starving myself in one of the countries with the best cuisine in the world. And I got quite sick. Like, I mean, I couldn't, because I wasn't eating, I couldn't stand up. I was very weak. I would be very dizzy whenever I stood up. And I started to feel nauseous every single day. And so, I was actually, even though it was unpleasant, I was happy because I didn't want to eat anything. I was so sick that I didn't want to eat anymore. And I felt like that was an achievement.
And you wanted to come back and impress everybody by your weight. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I'd starved myself was because I knew that I had to take extreme measures to get extreme results, because I wanted to return from Italy thin. And I thought the only way I could do it is to not eat anything at all. Again, I lost some weight, but I was still the cultural idea of fat. Interestingly, I sort of got, this is where like the difficulties and the frustrations around dieting comes in, is even though I wasn't thin, I was smaller than I'd ever been. And I found, that people were very, happy about my weight loss. They told me that I looked great and I had more interest from men. And it was like they either couldn't see or they didn't care to see that I was suffering, that I was extremely unhappy, that I was unhealthy. And they didn't choose to see that. And I think that that's so damaging, and I think a lot of women can relate to this. I've talked to so many women who, I've had a number of friends tell me they've had really extreme illnesses, and literally like a physical illness, like something where they're losing so much weight and they don't know why, and they're sick, and they talk about feeling like they're going to die and everyone is telling them that they look great, Yeah,
I know exactly. I had the same experience, and that's intoxicating. That obviously you want to keep going. You want to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I sort of, I think I didn't officially stop dieting until like my late 20s, but I think that I sort of halfway stopped dieting a little bit when I was in my early 20s. And I kind of just let my body do what it wanted to do, kind of like I was still calorically restricting, but I wasn't doing very extreme behavior. But even still, my life felt dictated by my size. My life felt dictated by what I was eating and whatnot. But yeah, it was fascinating to kind of experience, especially male attention when I was smaller was very different in nature than anything I'd ever experienced before. And I found that men were more aggressive romantically, that men were more interested in becoming monogamous more quickly, that men really, I felt like they really wanted to lock me down. They really wanted to sort of, rather than like, I think if you're a fat girl, one thing, and you're a straight woman who like dates men, you are constantly dealing with men being non-committal about you. Oh, I don't know. Maybe we should be polyamorous. Maybe I'll see you next week. Maybe I'll come over. And that's kind of what we have to deal with. And to experience the extreme opposite, where men are like calling me and asking me, when can we be monogamous? When can we become committed? When are you going to commit to me? And being the same person, like I'm the same person.
It's sick.
Yeah.
It's so sick. And then what happened after that?
So I ended up, there were a few steps along the way that really changed my attitude towards my body. And to be honest with you, some of it began with men, like sleeping with men. And even though they weren't feminists or especially wonderful people, but I had believed that no one would ever desire me. I believed that no one would ever sleep with me, no one ever loved me, and no one would ever want to date me. And immediately upon sort of sexual debut for me, which was 17 years old, I was inundated with attention from men. And it was mostly sexual. I didn't have a lot of expectations. I mostly just wanted to have sex. I was desperate to have sex. Because I had been like a virgin for so long and I hated it. Like I wanted to have a boyfriend in high school, but none of the boys would date me because they knew that I was fat and like that they were going to be tortured alongside me if they dated me. Which is like culturally where we're still at. Like,
Yes.
Sometimes it feels like culture is an extension of high school. It's such a weird bummer, but anyway, I ended up I decided to take matters into my own hands. And I was like, okay, the boys my age don't want to date me. Fine. I'll find older professional men on the phone and the internet.
Yes.
And so at 17, I saw a commercial for a phone dating service where you call in and you can hear men and then talk to them and then you can meet them if you want. So I was so excited and I lied about my age because you have to be 18 to use it. I lied about my age and then all of a sudden I had this like veritable feast of men. All of them were, because the men had to pay and the women didn't, and it was quite expensive for the men. All the men were like professional white collar dudes. It was so funny because like at 17 years old, I'm being taken to fancy dinners and eating like ridiculous fancy French food like foie gras, and it was not the American 17-year-old experience.
Nope.
Yeah, and so in a lot of ways, like it was really great, and it determined my like rich taste moving forward romantically. Interestingly, it's just hilarious to me how like my experience of being rejected by the boys in my neighborhood growing up, like affected, like essentially led to me like going out to have fancy experiences over and over again with these men who were like in their 30s and had tons of money to spend on me. I'm sorry, there's construction happening outside my house and it's so loud. Can you hear it?
I can hear you better than the construction, so we're fine.
Okay, good. So in a lot of ways, the first ever moment of realization or sort of like I was beginning to pull back the veil a little bit was actually due to like men's sexual attention. And then I went on a little bit later in college to learn about feminism. I became really, really involved with these like radical, feminists. And I did the whole, like I grew out my armpit hair and my leg hair. And I did all the things that you do when you're kind of a new to feminism. And it was really great. It was so important to like claim independence and to be rude and it was so incredible to have women around me telling me that I should live life on my own terms, that no man should determine what I do with my body. And it was so radical having grown up in a household where I watched all the women around me just obey the men around me. And so I didn't know any better, really. I didn't know any different. And to be taught when I'm in my early 20s that I don't have to live like that, that I don't have to be ashamed of myself, that I can live on my own terms was incredibly powerful. And so that was another turning point. And then I ended up dating someone who was really fat positive. And it was interesting because he was really thin. And he was, he was like he was a New Zealander who was like thin and had blue eyes and like blonde hair. And he was like, he kind of had this ideal body. And when, he was the kind of person who, whenever we went out, it was incredible to date him because I saw what it's like when you're an attractive man to live in this culture. And like women would just come up, like I would go to the bathroom for 5 minutes and I'd come back and there'd be a woman trying to sleep with him. And it was just like, it was incredible, right? It was like this totally bizarro experience dating him. And interestingly, he was extremely fat positive. He was really, 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 really into my body. And he taught me a lot about how I deserve to be treated,
Yes.
like he just showed up for me and over and over again, he would defend me and he would teach me how beautiful I was and how important I was. And I remember, and this kind of leads to one more, the final part of the story, I think, in terms of my transformation out of dieting. But, I remember I was in graduate school and he went with me to a meeting that I was having with my advisor. And I told her I wanted to study fat women. I wanted to study fatness. I wanted to do research on this area. And she told me not to do it. She said that it was not a good career move for me, that it would not benefit me professionally, and that everything about fatness had already been written.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And this was like in 2009, 2010. And I left kind of feeling, demoralized. And he happened to be sitting outside during that meeting and he heard everything. And when I walked out of the office, kind of, you can imagine like sad me with my head down. I'm walking out of her office because she's told me not to do the thing I want to do. And he stands up very quickly and he says, "Fuck her."
Great guy.
And he says, fuck her and her fat phobia, you should do what you want and we'll find someone else who supports you. He kind of became the person who was my cheerleader in a lot of ways. And it was really powerful being with him. And he just taught me a lot of things about, just like who I was in the world. And he encouraged me to be myself. He encouraged me to dress exactly the way I wanted to dress. He encouraged me to do exactly what I wanted to do. And that's honestly and unfortunately very rare for men.
I wanted to say, yeah.
Totally.
Totally rare.
The final sort of step in the process was graduate school, where I ended up doing research on fat women, and that led me to interview a lot of fat women about their lives. And through that process, I became introduced to fat activism. And these were actual fat women doing fat activism, and it blew my mind. I remember, there was this one time where I went to a conference for fat people in California, in Oakland, California. And I walk into the conference space and there's a big pool and there's fat women all around the pool, and they're wearing these really hot bathing suits, vintage style, and bikinis and monokinis. And they're laughing and they're putting on suntan lotion, and they're talking, they're gossiping, and they're clearly having a good time. And you can see that they're not ashamed. You can see that they're not ashamed of themselves and the way that they're behaving and the way that they're carrying themselves. And then there's this one woman who comes out and she's wearing a red bathing suit with white polka dots, and she's got big sunglasses, and she's got big boobs and a big belly and big legs and big arms. And she walks out, kind of saunters out like a queen. And then there's a boy behind her carrying a little parasol, little umbrella over her so she won't have a sunburn.
I love it. I love it.
In that moment, I think that was the moment, that was the conversion, where I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what I deserve. And so that was kind of like the epiphany, like the big spiritual moment for me, was to be able to watch another fat woman live the fabulous life that I'd always wanted to live.
You know, what people want when they say they want to lose weight is usually something like feeling uninhibited, feeling free, feeling loved, feeling seen. And we have just been taught that we cannot live a full life and a satisfying life and a happy life unless we are thin. And somehow this internalized fat phobia kind of develops with that. And what you saw and what liberated you seems to have been the fact that you saw that other women could very well feel like queens and have the life right now with the size they were in, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. I have so many thoughts. So it's important, first of all, to recognize that diet culture teaches us magical thinking. I mean, in a lot of ways, we believe that that if we lose weight, and that if we work hard enough, we can lose weight, and that if we lose weight, that we can have these incredible lives where, you know, men are driving into walls when we cross the street and people are just handing us the things that we want in life. And I think that, first of all, it's important to recognize that that's a fantasy, that is as strange and magical as me telling you about Santa Claus or me telling you about the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy. I mean, it's childlike belief system. And I think it's very important to recognize that most of us are introduced to the system when we are children. And that is why the idea never becomes interrupted, because we experience the education in childhood, and then often it's accompanied by traumatic events like being tortured, being made fun of, being told you're ugly, you know, all the kinds of things that, if you're bigger, are normal parts of your life. And so it's important to recognize that you get introduced to the idea in childhood. The trauma cements the idea, and then it never goes away unless you purposely remove it from your mind. In the same way that, you know, I want you to think of diet culture in the way that we think of religion, okay? There's a reason that people teach children religion. There's a reason that they want children to begin to understand religion at a very young age, because at that age, you can teach a child anything and they will ultimately believe you, because children are being introduced to a world they don't know. And so they just kind of, you tell a child, this is what the world is. This is what a leaf is. This is what a tree is. This is what, you know, this is what anything is. And they hear you and they believe you because they have no reason not to. So I think what's important to recognize is that there's sort of like a few false things that are happening at the same time. One, we shouldn't be encouraging people to all look the same. It's a very negative thing I think it's really dangerous to sort of encourage people to all look the same or to all think the same. We know historically, this is a very dangerous way of thinking.
Oh, yes.
And I think, unfortunately, diet culture pushes us to all work towards one single standard of beauty, when in actuality, we're all already beautiful. We are all already worthwhile just because we're alive, just because we're people. And I think that's what diet culture takes away from us, our own ability to see our own beauty and our own humanity. And so I think, so to begin with, there's this false belief that if you work hard enough, that everyone can look like a model. And that is 100% not true. You could put 100 people in a room and feed them the same and make them exercise the same, and you will get 100 different bodies. I think what's really frustrating about diet culture also is this belief that if you are not thin, it's because you haven't worked hard enough. You personally have failed, when in actuality, the problem is this awful ideology that forces all of us to live these sad lives where we're calorie counting and exercising and waiting for the future when someday we will be thin. The problem is the idea that you have to lose weight in order to begin living. That is the problem. And that is what needs to be eradicated and gotten rid of, not your body. the idea, the bigotry, you know, that's what needs to go. And I think what's so hard is that we believe that it's our fault. This, of course, leads to, I think, the third problem, the next problem, which is that we end up in this kind of strange sort of prisoner's dilemma where, for example, when you're dieting, you know that you're not happy. You know that you don't enjoy this. And yet, I think what becomes difficult is we want something different, but in our minds, we're worried that if we stop striving, that we're ultimately going to lose out. And I think this leads to kind of like we continue to opt in, even though we want to opt out, because we're afraid that we're going to change and the culture is going to stay the same and we're going to be left behind. And this leaves us with a dilemma. The truth is that if you don't like dieting, you should stop dieting. It is only through our individual and collective choice to stop doing something we don't like that creates new paradigms, that creates a new way of being normal, you know? I think that we're opting in and we're thinking that we're making our life better, but in fact, we're making it worse. And so I think that like these are all of the ways in which like dieting becomes internalized, right? Because like we're taught that if we do this thing, if we eat a certain way and our bodies look a certain way, that we can have love, success, visibility, and freedom. And the truth is, we don't need to be thin to have those things. But I think what's hard is like we do live in a culture where fat phobia is seen as normal and it's not seen as bigotry. Even though it is, it's seen as something that's like, oh, we're just trying to promote health. And so I think, honestly, there's a lot of confusion that people feel. They know they don't like it, but they don't know how to stop doing it because they think that if they stop doing it, that their lives will fall apart. And the truth is that isn't the case. But the culture is very good at making us believe these magical things about the power of thinness and the power of fatness.
I think there are two things that make diet culture so damn addictive or plausible, because diets do work short term, and that's why we go back to them like addicts, because we think that we did it wrong. I mean, I did that for 20 years and I thought it was just me and that I was the only one suffering, and that, you know, it was just the truth. As you said, ever since I was a kid, I just learned that I had to be different, and I experienced the fat shaming until I was 20 years old, and I knew that I was afraid of going there, and I experienced thin privilege, and I didn't want to let that go because I was afraid of being hurt like that again. And the second thing that makes diet culture so damn pervasive is the fact that people in larger bodies are, you know, by the mass media, are only portrayed as either lazy, depressed, unhealthy, certainly sexless, or the butt of every joke, or maybe if they're playing the comedian. I usually got away when I played the comedian. People accepted me when I was younger. There never really are any happy people in large bodies like you saw at the pool that you described. And when they are happy and having hot sex and tell the world about it, then people get mad. They get really mad. So why is that? Why would I be mad at someone who tells me that they're happy?
Right. I mean, it essentially has to do with this really unfortunate cultural reality, which is the belief that people, like, you have to sacrifice in order to be happy. And that when fat people are seen as people who are lazy and immoral, and are seen as people who don't have discipline and don't know how to make sacrifices.
Exactly.
And so in our culture, we believe that people who don't do that don't deserve any of the benefits of our culture. I mean, here's what's so sad, right? For the entirety of human history, humans have always striven for freedom. We've always wanted love, like on some level, you know, I think like we've wanted safety. These are all like human truths. I think what's really unfortunate is it's not the job of society to make you happy. It's the job of society to maintain itself. And this is true of any system. Diet culture is the same. Diet culture doesn't care if you're happy or sad. The diet industry is not in the business of making you happy or sad. The diet industry is in the business of maintaining itself as a business. And so I think it's really important to recognize, like when we're dealing with an institution or a very large historic business, that its primary goal, in fact, its only goal, is survival. And it will do that by any means necessary. And so it's really important to be suspicious when sort of cultural institutions that are largely preoccupied with their own survival are telling you what to do with your life. Because at the end of the day, they're not there to make you happy. They're there to maintain themselves. And so I think what's important to recognize is like society, sort of these like bigger systems, know that if they hold certain things that humans historically find valuable and historically need, if they hold those things ransom, that they can make us do anything that they want us to do. And this is what ends up happening, right? It's like, it's not okay that we're told culturally that in order to receive love, we have to do all of these things. Like that is the definition of like not like of conditional love, which is like the worst, right?
It's
I think what's terrible,
dehumanizing.
yeah, totally. Because at the end of the day, the truth is, the real truth with a capital T is that we all deserve unconditional love, like because we're alive, you know?
Preach. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think what's hard is society holds all these things ransom and says, oh, if you want love, you have to do this if you're a woman, and you have to do this if you're a man. And if you don't do that, you don't deserve love. You know, if you want marriage, you have to do this and you have to do this. Otherwise, you don't deserve marriage. If you want a home, you have to do this and do this, or you don't deserve it. And I think what's really hard is people are very bought into the idea of earning, like the idea, and this is like capitalism, right? Like essentially the idea that we have to earn things in order to gain commodities. And what's really sad is this mentality, this capitalist mentality, enters our most intimate domains, like love and freedom, like our pursuits of love and freedom. Anyway, so it's sort of like if you can imagine in your mind waiting in line for something. And there are people who have been waiting in line for 5 or 10 or maybe even 50 years, and they feel like they're entitled to be at the front of the line. And then there's some people in the back who are, you know, who aren't following the rules, who maybe are fat or whatever. And the people at the front of the line who have been there for 50 years and feel like they deserve to have the things that they waited in line for, if somebody who they feel is at the back of the line comes to the front of the line, they get very upset because they feel like they've cheated. They feel like they played along and they obeyed all the rules and they deserve the prize at the end of the day. But the problem is, of course, that it's not guaranteed, right? Like that society cannot give you love. Like whatever diet culture, whatever society teaches you, it in fact cannot and will not guarantee you love. And it cannot and will not guarantee you freedom. And those are the things that we strive for the most as people. That is what takes up most of our emotional energy. And I sort of think like this is the lie that we have to unveil in order to really be free from that kind of thinking. Is like at the end of the day, you've been waiting in line, you followed all the rules, and guess what? You're still not guaranteed shit. And I think this fact is very liberating. In fact, what the reason why people get so upset is because of the promise that the culture makes. And the promise is a lie. You know, the culture lies, diet culture lies to us and says, if you do this, you will get this. And the truth is it can't guarantee it. And so I think that when people see somebody who they think is cheating, quote unquote, or skipping the line or something like that, and they're getting a benefit that the culture has taught us that only people with privilege get to have, they feel very angry. And I think that this is like deeply emblematic of how ill we are as a culture, because you're right, we should be very happy for people who are living their authentic lives and finding joy and success in those pursuits.
Yeah, I think that those people who have been standing in line forever, those are, you know, people that have bought into the idea that we can hate ourselves into a version that we are going to eventually love. and
Right.
that doesn't work. And then there's someone cutting in line that tells you, no, I'm just going to love myself right now. And then they're probably going to be, what the fuck? I've been waiting here for 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I get you. So you are giving lectures all across the country and mainly to college students, if I'm right? Right?
Yeah. Yes.
What are your lectures about and how are they received?
Yeah, most of the lectures I do I do this one lecture called Lose Hate Not Weight, where I talk about my childhood growing up. I talk about being a dieter and somebody who weight fluctuated a lot. And I talk about the history of diet culture. I think that in our minds, dieting is a modern invention, but in fact, it is an old invention. And dieting is at least 200 years old, and it sort of started with a reverend in the U.S. named Sylvester Graham, who invented the graham cracker. Interestingly, yeah. And Sylvester Graham was very anti-masturbation, and he believed that we could control our sexuality with food. That if we were careful about what we eat and we ate low calorie, low fat food, that we could improve our morality and improve our species, like improve humanity.
He was right about that. When I was really hungry all the time, my libido was fucked.
Yeah, totally. Yes. So yeah, I think it's a very old ideology that we still practice. So I talk about that. And then I talk about these sort of intersectional ways of looking at diet culture, because I think what's important to recognize is that women experience fat shaming and diet culture disproportionately. We experience it more intensely. Women are the disproportionate consumers of diet products. Women are far likelier to get weight loss surgery than men are. And women are far likelier to express dissatisfaction with their body than men are. And so it's important to look at all these different ways. And if you look at, for example, immigrants, right? In the US, part of assimilating into becoming an American is accepting the expectation of you to have a certain body size and for you to exercise. And it's part of assimilation, And I think when we start to look at dieting from all these different perspectives, we can see this very complex story, because dieting is a metaphor, right? We're using it symbolically. We're using dieting, we're using food, we're using exercise as a way to
comply,
to comply. And I think it's hard because a lot of people don't realize, no, actually, it's not, you're not actually obsessed with what you're eating. You're actually obsessed with compliance. Mm-hmm. You're actually obsessed with obedience, because you believe that through obedience that you can gain something. And so it's important. So I talk a lot about that. I talk about the different ways in which diet culture interacts with race, interacts with gender, interacts with ability and sexuality and sexual orientation. And then we kind of finished by talking about some different ways that we can begin to engage with our body. And I talk about all bodies are good bodies. All bodies have inherent worth. We all deserve love, regardless of size or weight or health status. And it's sort of really changing the way that people think about what their life can look like. And so, yeah, that's what I cover in most of the lectures.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about the intersectionality of the different discriminations like racism, homophobia, sexism, classism?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think about, let's take the instance of a trans person. So one of the things that's really complex about the way that fat interacts with gender is that, for example, a lot of times men don't want to be fat, not necessarily because they don't like the way it looks, but because our culture feminizes fatness. And so fat men are considered more feminine. And in general, if you're bigger, you sort of like if you're curvier, if you have like a bigger chest or a bigger belly or a bigger butt, there's all of a sudden this kind of like notion that men are supposed to be hard and men are supposed to be cut, you know? And if you're like, for example, if you're a trans man and you're sort of someone who is maybe not seen as in the culture in the gender that you want to present and that you feel, you might take on really intense exercise and caloric restriction to have the typical masculine body because it makes you feel more like you are being seen by the culture in the gender that you feel most like close to. And so I think like that's an example of like an intersection, right? Like where sometimes people use dieting and weight loss and going to the gym and stuff like that as a way to kind of pass. I think when we're talking about race, people of color can decrease their experience of racism if they are seen as being in line with American expectations of gym going and dieting. Like it's a way that people can show that they're invested in the culture as it exists right now. And this is something that's really important for people of color to show the culture, because otherwise we're considered a threat. Like, I mean, and it's like, and I think also to take it to the gender piece in a related way, women who are not dieting are seen as rebellious and disobedient. This has a lot to do with the history of gender in the West, and the idea that women are supposed to live lives that have been predetermined for us, and that dieting is part of our expression of submission to patriarchy and to the culture as we know it. And so these are kind of some examples of like the intersections of diet, culture, fat phobia, and like race, gender, and things like that.
I suppose this plays into what Linda Bacon recently wrote an article about how weight stigma exacerbates almost all of the other social injustices because it's all across the board and you make everything worse.
Right.
If you fat shame people that are poor, that's not going to help anything. If you fat shame someone who is maybe of a different sexual orientation, it only provokes shame, and shame has never, ever made anyone happier, healthier, or feeling more loved. So it's all detrimental anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was this recent study that came out in September of 2015 where they found, they did this enormous amount of research and found that that for fat people, that it was fat shaming that led to shorter lives.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it was just incredible, right? Because like we believe culturally that we shouldn't be fat because fat people die earlier and fat people have these like illnesses and fat people have heart attacks and whatnot. And what the research is showing is that fat phobia is creating these problems.
Exactly.
That it's actually the very stressful experience of living in a society where you are constantly dehumanized and judged that leads to shorter lives, that leads to, I mean, when you have more stress, your heart is more stressed, your major organs are more stressed, and this leads to chronic illnesses. And I mean, they've done this research with other marginalized groups. They've done this research with gay men. They've done this research with the Black community in the United States, communities that have unusual amounts of health problems. And they went in and did the research and found, shockingly, it was the ongoing prejudice these people were experiencing through the entirety of their lives that were leading to incredible amounts of stress that were affecting the trajectory of their lives and their health. And so I think that it's pretty clear to me, at least.
Yeah, sure. It sounds nothing but logical. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, and like you were mentioning, as Linda Bacon was writing about, it's important to recognize that if you're somebody who's already experiencing racism or already experiencing sexism, when you add fat phobia to that equation, you're just adding more stress. You're adding a guarantee Exactly. You're adding a guarantee of like somebody living a shorter life. And that is real. That's the reality that we don't want to face culturally.
Yeah, I'm pretty active in the Association of Size Diversity in Health. And I think it's there that I read weight is not the problem. Weight stigma is the problem when it comes to health. And that, I think I wanted to shout it out into the world because everywhere I go in real life, I mean, I'm surrounded by an incredible amount of diet talk and body commenting and food policing and fat shaming. And I don't even know what to say because every time I speak up, I end up feeling like I did when I was a kid, like the odd one out. I feel isolated and lonely because people look at me like, what? Because I'm not in line anymore, right?
Right, exactly.
So how do you take care of your own resilience in all of this? Because we're pretty much going upstream here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few things like put on your own mask first before you help another person. Because we are in an emergency as a culture, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to remember that like your mental health and survival is at risk. You need to keep investing in your own well-being before you try to help anybody else. And so I often encourage people when they're in the beginning phases of healing their relationship to their bodies and they're just starting to leave diet culture, is to do everything in your power to invest all of your emotional energy into yourself. And so I think it's important that like when you're dealing with somebody, when you're dealing with people who have negative things to say or judgmental things to say, or you're dealing with your friends who are constantly diet talking and constantly talking about their bodies, that rather than outputting energy into trying to fix them or change their mind, to really redirect that energy inward into ourselves. What do I need right now? What do I need to feel okay about what I'm doing? Because it's very subversive. Imagine all of the energy you're putting into everything. I want you to imagine it like it's a bank a little bit and sort of like you have this account and how much money are you putting into your account? You're putting money into everybody else's account and you've got like how much is in yours, And I think that's really important and that's something that we're not taught to do. But like, yeah, for me, it looks like taking time out if I need it. It looks like centering my own pleasure and my own happiness. It looks like for example, there are moments where I'll get coverage from like a major website or a television show, and then all of a sudden there's people coming onto my social media feed who like hate my guts. They don't even know me. And what I've started to, I part of my self-care is like rather than talking to every single person and trying to change their mind or trying to show them that actually I'm not scary or mean, I just decide to like sit back and watch them because I'm like, well, you guys are awful and I can't, there's nothing, I don't have to change your mind. Like you're the one who has to change your mind because you're the one with a terrible ideology. And I just sort of think like it's really important to take that step back and say like, I don't need to prove anything to anybody. I have inherent worth and value. I don't have to change anybody's mind. And anybody who doesn't like what I'm doing can just leave. There's the door.
Yeah, sure. Does it not ever affect you anymore?
Yeah, no, it still affects me. I think that people are going to say whatever they're going to say. And for me, my power and my self-care comes in how I decide to interface with that. That can look like a lot of different things. Like sometimes I'll just watch it and be like, wow, this is really, really ridiculous. And sometimes I'll just sort of say, you know what, today is going to be a day where I don't look at my phone, where I don't look at this website. I'm just going to take a day off, So absolutely, it still affects me at times. But like I have this analogy that I like to tell people that sort of contextualizes my belief about fat phobia. And it's like if someone came up to me on the street or on the internet and they stopped me and they said, you're a woman, your uterus makes you inferior, you cannot drive or do complex mathematical equations because of your gender. I would just like with them in
laugh.
earnest.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, wow. Like, where are you from? Like the 1850s? And what's interesting, right, is like there was a time where culturally we truly believed those things about women.
Oh, yeah.
And we happen to be at a time when we believe horrible, retrograde, incorrect things about fat people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to take that power and sort of say, like, you know, you sound ridiculous. And I know that we live in a cultural moment where you feel like you're right. But in my mind, I know that you're not. And like that's kind of the thing that we have to carve out for ourselves. Like that's the thing that like that's the house that we have to build for ourselves, because the culture isn't going to build that house for us, you know?
No, it's probably never going to build that house for us. And what you said, yeah, what you said reminded me of a cool quote that I read. It said, "I'm the daughter of the witches you didn't burn." And that's, yeah, like, yeah, there was a time when they used to burn witches. Now we don't do that anymore. And I'm one of those daughters. You know what I mean?
Yes, totally.
I kind of love that. So your path towards self-acceptance is still going on, or do you ever have bad body days at all?
No, I mean, I have bad body days. Like, I think what's hard is, one of the things I always remind people is, you know, for some people when they're in recovery, the trauma or their healing, the trauma they experience is safely behind them. Mm-hmm. When you are a fat person in this culture, the trauma is ongoing. So it's difficult to heal while also going out in the world and recognizing that you have the potential to be traumatized again right now. That is hurtful. That is scary. And that's violent. And like there's a lot of things wrong with people who do that, of course. But I think that, you know, it does affect me, of course. Like it affects me that I, as a woman, am sometimes afraid to leave my house because I know that I create a safe space inside my home, but the moment I leave my home, I'm out in the culture, and the prevailing cultural attitude is that my body is wrong and that I deserve to be treated poorly because I'm fat. And so I think what's hard is like I have bad body image days, but they're not about me. They're about living with a traumatic reality of fat phobia, you know? And I think what's hard is like a lot of times when people have those bad body image days, all they're trying to think about is like, how can I make this stop? That's a logical question to ask when you are feeling attacked, you know? And I think what's important to remember is, again, that like the answer isn't to participate in your own oppression. Like as hard as it is to hold it down for ourselves, that like recognizing that participating in our own oppression will not give you freedom. It will not give you joy. It will not give you life. You know, for me, it's like when I'm having those moments, I remind myself that like I made a choice and I stand by that choice. Like given the opportunity to stop dieting, if I were given that opportunity again, would I take it? And the answer is yes, 100 times out of 100, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that what's important to remember is that like a bad body image day, doesn't mean that you failed, doesn't mean that you're not doing it right. It just means that you're a human living in an unfortunate sort of historical moment, you know?
Yeah, very unfortunate. And I think that what you said before was that sometimes we just need to take care of ourselves and put the mask on our own faces first. But when you're like, I am very passionate about changing the whole paradigm. So every time I come across a situation where diet talk and food policing and everything is active, as I said, I feel lonely and isolated because people don't react or they cannot take in what I said. So how do we ever start to really, you know, change the narrative and reduce weight stigma without hurting ourselves too bad?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's a couple of things I want to say to that. The first thing is, one thing that is very powerful that we often underestimate is the power of witnessing an individual living life on her own terms. Like I think about the woman, the story I told you about the woman who was wearing the bathing suit and the boy was behind her. She didn't say a single thing to me. She didn't write anything. I hadn't read anything she'd written. She did nothing but exist unapologetically.
Yes.
And that was the most powerful political act I'd ever witnessed until that point. All you can do is take care of yourself and act like a queen and treat yourself like the babe you are. Like if that's all you can do, that is super powerful. That is not nothing. I think like for me, and to sort of take it to the second thing, which is like really proactively engaging with people. For me, I do it in ways that make that center my pleasure and my joy. I love writing, and writing is something that I think honors my both my desire to change the cultural attitude about these issues, but also centers me. So I think like that's something that I really love. Like I happen to also love public speaking. You know, I love to talk. And so like for me, you know, getting to lecture and constructing lectures fulfill this like really important need of mine to sort of like disseminate the knowledge. And also it's fun for me because I love speaking publicly. I think what's important is when we decide to interface with the culture, to do it in a way that feels organic and authentic to us. Our political activism can be part of our self-care because we can amplify the activities that make us feel most like ourselves and incorporate our political education into that.
Yeah, that's what Babe Camp brought out for me. I was a participant of January's Babe Camp, yeah. And after that, I started the blog. And now a few months later, the podcast is out already. So, yeah, you kind of made me see that I can do something as well. And that I just have to find my outlet that feels right to me. And I feel very honored to be one of your babes.
Yeah, totally.
Yoo-hoo. And I need one clarification because the question comes up pretty regularly about body positivity, and the term has been watered down somewhat. And I realized recently that everybody seems to have their own understanding of body positivity. For me, it was just like, let's be body positive, as in let's be human again and humane. And that's like every body is a good body, and that includes every color, every gender, everything. And that's not a personal thing. Of course, it does leak into my personal experience of I want to be more body positive towards myself, but I see it as a general attitude towards other people. Like I am positive towards different bodies and their shapes and their colors and their everything. But I saw that somehow this is not the case for many people. For many people, this seems to be a very personal thing. Like, I'm body positive and now I eat healthy. And it sort of starts to sound diety all over again somehow.
Yes.
So, would you please explain what body positivity is in conjunction to fat acceptance and, reducing weight stigma?
I mean, I like your definition. I think that's in line with my own. So in short, my opinion, my summary of my politics are that every single human being deserves a life free of stigma and discrimination, regardless of size, shape, or health status. That's like the summary of the entirety of my work. Mm-hmm. And so I think what's difficult is, even though I use the phrases body positivity and fat acceptance or fat liberation interchangeably, I am much more in line with what is traditional fat activism and fat politics and fat liberation. And it's unfortunate. I mean, the truth is, right, I think there was a time at the inception of body positivity where it was much more in line with fat politics. And now I think that we need to kind of demarcate those ideological differences, unfortunately. I think what's ended up happening is that these businesses and different television shows have begun to really co-opt body positivity and turn it into turn it into kind of like a capitalist consumer thing. And I think what's really strange is that they sort of want to make money off of it without actually questioning the current cultural reality of fat phobia. And they kind of want to keep promoting fat phobia, honestly. I was shocked. I was at a rally a year ago in New York for Lane Bryant, and they had a campaign called Plus is Equal. I went and I'm like, I don't love Lane Bryant. They're not my favorite manufacturer of clothing, but I was excited to go and represent. And I was shocked to find not only did they were giving out t-shirts that only came in small, medium, large, and extra large. There were no actual plus size t-shirts at the event. Yeah, I was like horrified. And then of course, what's funny and sad is that I wrote an article about it, and in response, they lied and said that they did in fact have plus size clothing there. And I'm like, you didn't. I was there anyway.
That's bigotry right there.
I know, total bigotry. And then the other thing that happened was everybody they had a stage where they had like performers and speakers. Almost every speaker was a thin person. The MC was a comedian who herself was talking about her own weight loss, and people were clapping while she was talking about how much weight she lost. And then she started making jokes about like how she can't have sex with people who are above a certain size because her bed is too small. It was the worst. And then these dancers come up, and they're like kind of curvy or like sort of chubby. And after they do this amazing dance, I'm so excited about them. They start talking about like how it's so fun to be curvy, but it's important not to eat too much. It was like the confusion theater that is body positivity right now.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I think this afternoon entirely summarizes how confused people are about this issue.
Yeah, and you cannot even call this vague. Body positivity can be called vague, but this is even as if people were, being led on to come to a body positive event, and then they're being led into in the opposite direction, actually.
No, totally. And I mean, I think what's really difficult is, and this is why like I do Babe Camp, and this is why I do the work that I do, especially talking about the history of dieting, the political reality of dieting. You cannot skip the political education, because if you do, this is what ends up happening. Like you end up kind of being like, sure, I'm body positive. I just happen to want to lose weight. I just happen to believe that all people should be healthy. And I'm like, okay, something got skipped here. I think what's really difficult is some of it goes back to like how afraid we are. I think women in particular have been made to feel afraid of being feminists. And the truth is, like, being fat positive, being truly body positive is a deeply feminist, deeply radical act. And I think what's difficult is like people sort of want to enact a consumable idea, but they don't actually want to deeply sort of problematize the culture. They don't want to actually criticize the culture. Like the culture defeminizes feminists. And so it has the potential of becoming this like double extra threat for fat women, because like we're afraid to not only be defeminized as fat people, but also to be defeminized as like actually being political. A lot of times people become complicit in that, people become complicit in like the confusion that permeates body positivity. And so I think it's really important to articulate like the fact that at its core, I think body positivity is about the idea that like dieting doesn't work, that we shouldn't try to like change our bodies that ultimately harms us, and that at the end of the day that all bodies are good bodies and are beautiful bodies, like you were mentioning.
Yeah. And I think that generally, like you said, feminism is a very, very misunderstood term, I think, because I didn't understand it for a long time. So I was like, I'm not a feminist. It's still stigmatized, the feminism stigma. Like you just hear the word and people go, oh no, and they shut down.
Right. Totally. And it's like hilarious. Ultimately, for me, feminism is about women living life on their own terms. And that's kind of the entirety of of what it looks like for me. And so I understand. I think there's been a huge historical project in stigmatizing feminism, and it's no accident, right? Like when you teach women that the tool that they can use to liberate themselves is actually disgusting and gross and nobody will like you. It's a very, very sort of effective way of keeping women from their own liberation. When you claim feminism, you claim your own body, you claim autonomy. And this is a deeply political act of disobedience when you're a woman. And so I think there's incredible power in it. And I think that our culture is proactively engaged in taking power away from women.
Obviously it is. So that's why I think it's important to see that we can awaken those inner rebels, and certainly education about all these matters helps. And Babe Camp helps as well. So would you please explain what it entails and what you do with us?
Yeah, so Babe Camp is a 4-week course online. So for 4 weeks, every day from Monday through Friday, I send one email. I sort of call it like the buttery croissant equivalent of a political education. So you get like kind of a little tidbit every single day, Monday through Friday. And each week we tackle a different theme. So there's 4 units, and each week we talk about a different sort of thing. And then on Saturday, at the end of the week in the morning, we do a group call where everybody can call in and we talk to one another. I give an overview of what we discussed during the week, and then we talk about, answer questions, or we talk about things that have happened for people during the week, and it's really powerful. And then at the end of the program, people can get a certificate that says that they graduated from Babe Camp. If you are ready to break up with diet culture and you need someone to hold your hand through the process, Babe Camp is for you. My goal is for every single woman in the world to take Babe Camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in my mind, it's like, in a lot of ways, I created Babe Camp because I was so lucky and so privileged to meet people just in my life who taught me how to be free and taught me how to love myself. And I think that what's unfortunate is that most people, most women especially, don't have access to that. You know, most women aren't as lucky as I was. And so I really wanted to, it was sort of a gesture of democratizing education. And to like share, sort of pay it forward, or to share the incredible benefits that I got as a young woman. I wanted to share them with the world in a way that was accessible. I mean, I look forward to the day when women living lives on our own terms is just normal, you know, and like this conversation is going to feel outdated.
I'm looking forward to meeting people in real life that have the same mindset. As per now, it's mostly just happening online, and the real world is sort of like, it weirds me out more and more. So, are you, yeah.
Yes.
Are you hopeful?
No, I am hopeful. Like, and I'll tell you why. The entire diet industry was based on women not knowing there was another option. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you have an entire industry based upon one single piece of information, and like people not having access to it, I think there's no way for that industry to be sustainable. So I think in a lot of ways, like what is happening is this incredible shift on a cultural level that's happening mostly online, and that's what's making it so viral, you know? Yeah. That's incredible, and that's the power of people being visibly fat online and talking about their experiences and talking about their lives. And so I think what's really significant is that as more people see fat people living these full lives and refusing to diet, they will become emboldened by that action. Like, I want to give you kind of like an interesting example of like a moment, like somebody saying something very brief to me and it changing my life. And I think it's like the same kind of thing. I was dating somebody who was like a really feminist dude, and like he was fantastic. And I remember that we were about to have sex, and he wanted me to be on top. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to be on top. I don't know how to do that. And he looked at me and he said, just enjoy the ride. I was like, oh my God, like it was this incredible moment of like somebody, a man telling me that I could center my own
Yeah.
pleasure. And it like had never even occurred to me. It never had occurred to me that I could like just enjoy sex and I could just be present. And I think like likewise with dieting, it's like when you tell a woman, did you know that you didn't have to diet? Most women haven't even thought of this on their own because the diet industry has been so good at keeping that information from them. Like, honestly, most of the political work that's happening, it just takes an instant to tell women, did you know there are fat women wearing bikinis right now, living amazing lives? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this was something that we didn't see ever before. And now it's very easy to see it. And so I think that has incredible, incredible power.
It does. It does. It takes a lot of time to undo the whole damage, but it only takes one moment to start the undoing of the damage, I think.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah. So if people want to learn more about you, what you do, and, you know, how to connect with you, maybe if they're interested in Babe Camp, how can they find you? Please share your contact details with us before I ask you my last question.
Yeah, you can look me up at virgietovar.com. I'm on Instagram at Virgie Tovar and also on Twitter, the same at Virgie Tovar. And that's those are the best ways to sort of get in touch with me or look at my work.
And my last question for you is an important one. What would you like to be remembered for?
Oh my goodness. Oh God, that's such a hard question. Like, I'm trying to think, like, on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, I want to be remembered for like creating feminist change. And then I'm also like, I want to be remembered for having the cutest shoes. Like, I don't know. Something. I mean, it's like, I think on the one hand, there's like this deeply meaningful part of me that wants to leave like an important legacy, like leave the world a better place than I found it. But also I like want to be remembered for, like the ridiculous outfits that I wear and like my strength, my uppity attitude and like all these kinds of like the ridiculous hats that I wear and kind of just, you know, I'm the person who stands out in the room of 100 people.
And
that's kind of just
freedom.
who I am. Yeah, totally.
You do. And I think you are uniting women and, you know, giving us courage to do something, which obviously happens. And I think the more voices that start to talk about this, the better.
Yeah, thank
You're right
you.
on track. You're welcome. I want to thank you for your time. This has been an amazing talk.
You have like such a great voice, by the way. It's like calming but sexy. It's good.
Ooh, call me anytime if you need someone to talk you off the ledge.
Thank you.
Oh, you never know. So thank you so much, and I wish you a great day.
You too. Okay, bye.
Bye, Virgie. Bye.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.